Teaching today is exciting, and one of the reasons is because there is so much material available. I want to offer some advice as to how you might go about presenting a person or subject matter with all that which you have access to. Hello, I'm Dr. Ivy Lyons. I teach at the University of Mount Union in Alliance, Ohio, and I also am a visiting professor at Christ University in Bangalore, India. I will present my paper entitled Media Literacy and Pedagogy in the Classroom, Teaching About Malcolm X. We live in an age when there is information about practically everything at one's fingertips. Access to files and pictures and videos and newspapers and books and official documents is enormous. The implications for classroom impact are broad and serious. Effective use of this material confronts each teacher and student in ways scarcely imagined a generation ago. In times past, teachers were not just the users and disseminators of information, but often had a hand at creating new information, and most importantly, training the next generation of those who would themselves control and create information. Today, anyone can at any time access and create and disseminate information through a myriad of ways. Teachers now need to focus on helping students to discern useful information from many different sources. For the purposes of my paper, my students or audience are college age, first year or second year students of various majors, and I will be focusing on a prominent person, in this case, Malcolm X. So therefore, I will be using male pronouns throughout much of the paper. I recommend an approach that uses varied, verifiable, and vetted sources. No one person is one-dimensional. Everybody has layers. Using various sources, including fictional accounts, can help us to develop an accurate portrait of someone. Using sources that one can verify is important to ascertain its veracity and efficacy. Using vetted information goes a long way in understanding the subject matter and assures its accuracy. I suggest that you consider the following: an autobiography and a biography, pictures, videos, documentary style and drama, and voice recordings, essays and speeches, written or spoken by the subject. Any material recorded or about the subject by the government authorities, if possible. And of course, miscellaneous material. An autobiography is a good place to start because it gives you the context in which the person had lived this life, including the challenges, and also provides lots of background information. And of course, it is natural to start at the beginning. A biography is removed from the subject and can be a bit more unbiased. Furthermore, the biographer can provide a better conclusion and reveal information not known by the subject. The inclusion of pictures in the presentation adds dimension and depth. Knowing the gender and seeing the height, facial features, and stance tells you quite a bit about the person. Hearing the voice of the subject addresses some questions about what the person sounded like and what is his tone. The impact of this can linger long after the initial experience. A person's manner of speaking gives a rhythm, inflection, loudness, or softness of the words, and all of this enables the listener to draw conclusions not articulated with the words themselves. A video allows one to see how the subject moves and the kind of mannerism he employs as he speaks or interacts with others. Essays written and speeches made by the subject reveal an awful lot and are usually the focus of a presentation. By the way of the internet, recordings and writings made over a century ago are now available. In some cases, whole websites are dedicated to material on any subject matter. Official documents from government sources provide much information about groups or areas within a geographic area within which the subject resided. Census, application, official documents have useful information, and this information has usually been evaluated by someone on behalf of the government for future dissemination. Miscellaneous is a broad category and includes anything that does not fall within the norm of what one normally uses when looking or researching a person. Flyers, church bulletins, ticket stubs, advertisements, posters, marquee signs, promotional videos, souvenirs, unfinished recordings, anything that pertains to what you are studying, recorded or otherwise. Media literacy is important precisely because of the plethora of material available. Knowing how to recognize this material and access its impact becomes very important to most people. For purposes of this paper, I'm going to use Malcolm X, as I mentioned before. The understanding of this man is greatly enhanced in using many different sources to describe one of the most controversial and important figures in the civil rights movement. Malcolm X underwent several transformations. The importance of these transformations highlights the significant changes that Malcolm experienced. I have limited the paper to examine two of his transformations, and this presentation covers the basics, but only one transformation: Malcolm from the birth to early life. I have lists of sources at the end of the paper, but for now, I'll describe the broad areas of sources I will use in this presentation. Autobiography, the biography about his wife, biographies by others, his speeches, audio and visual, documentaries, a movie, drama, movie, and the sources for most of this material are books, websites, and of course, the movies. Much of this material has been vetted. We'll examine the early life of Malcolm. I call Malcolm X from Malcolm Little to prisoner 22843. A good, concise description of Malcolm's beginning is found in a biography about Betty Shabazz, Malcolm's wife. Malcolm was born Malcolm Little on May 19, 1925 in Omaha, Nebraska, the fifth of Earl and Louise Little's 7 children. Earl was a very dark-skinned man from Georgia, and Louise was a slender, very light-complexioned, Grenada-born immigrant. Both were disciples of Marcus Garvey, a Jamaican native and President General of the United Negro Improvement Association, and self-appointed Provisional President of Africa. Malcolm's father was also the president of the Omaha branch of the UNIA. His mother was a reporter and said that she was an active worker for the Garvey movement. Malcolm grew up in a proud household whose father was not afraid of anyone. His family was driven out of Omaha by the KKK when he was a baby. Their association with Garvey and their promotion of his ideas, especially by Earl, made them targets of hate groups like the KKK. Malcolm experienced violence not only from whites, but he witnessed his mother and father arguing quite a bit. His father also beat his mother, and they both beat their children. The death of Earl Little had a major impact on the family. The family suspected that he had been murdered by the Black Legion, although some claimed that it was an accident, which is what the coroner's report said at the time. This left Louise Little to survive with 8 children during the Depression eras and continue without her husband. You can imagine how difficult this was. Malcolm said that they were so hungry sometimes they were dizzy. They would eat boiled dandelions. She finally accepted public assistance, much to her dismay, Louise did. Psychological deterioration had set in. Malcolm, knowing how destitute the family was, began to steal. The welfare people began to undermine the unity of the family. According to Cone, one of Malcolm's biographers, Malcolm's memory of them partly explained his intense antipathy towards whites in his later life. Quote, they acted as if they owned us, as if we were their private property. As much as my mother would have liked to, she couldn't keep them out. She would get particularly incensed when they began insisting upon drawing us older children aside, one at a time, out on the porch or somewhere, and asking us questions or telling us things against our mother and against each other. His mother had a nervous breakdown and finally had to be committed to a psychiatric hospital. The children were split up to foster homes. Up to this point, Malcolm lived in an integrated neighborhood environment. Malcolm had gone to largely white schools and would often hear people refer to him and other Blacks as, now some of you may find this language offensive, nigger, coon, darky, and rastas. Malcolm became one of the top students in class and was well liked by everyone. One day, one of his teachers asked him what he wanted to be. Malcolm had not given it much thought up until then, but replied that he wanted to be a Negro lawyer. His teacher advised Malcolm to become a carpenter. He said that a lawyer was not a realistic goal for a, offensive word, nigger. Something changed inside of Malcolm at that point. He was very disappointed and soon lost interest in school. He finally dropped out when he was 15 and went to live with his sister Ellie Mae Little Collins in Boston. This was a very important change for Malcolm, which led him to look at himself differently. He was no longer a poor kid, but a Black boy who could not climb any higher than society allowed. With his father dead and his mother institutionalized, life would never be the same, and the promise of a sort of normalcy evaporated, making this transformation a profound consequence. I'm now going to play a short clip to show you Malcolm and what he looked like and how he sounded.
Who taught you, please, who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other. No, before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate? You should ask yourself, who taught you to hate being what God gave you?
Here, my sources, thank you very much for listening, and I hope you learned something about Malcolm X and about media literacy.